Hey, it's Jamie from jamieedwards.com again, and today I want to talk to you about how you can figure out what the best software project for you to join is. If you're struggling in the software project you're currently on and you're maybe having an inkling feeling, I joined the wrong project, then I hope this video helps you today by giving you some tips that you can use to figure out, is the company I'm about to join going to actually satisfy me and help me enjoy my project, or am I going to be frustrated and not feel fully fulfilled? Over my career on working with over 30 companies, I've been on some software projects where one person loves the project and another hates it. And I used to think that this was primarily because the technology preferences. One person might really love the tech stack that we're working with on the project, and somebody else just hated it. But I want to help you a little bit today by showing you some diagrams and explaining to you a little bit about why companies put people in positions depending on where their product is in its profit life cycle, and how with these tips you can maybe make a better decision so you find the project that'll really help you grow if that's what you're looking for. One funny story I can tell you is I was actually working on a project right out of college. I'd been at that company for about 2 or 3 years, and I was given an opportunity to lead a project. And as new members of the team came onto our software development project, there was one gentleman in particular who seemed to really be frustrated with the project. And many of us couldn't figure out why. We were using new technology. We thought it was a really great opportunity that he'd really enjoy. But I found out after talking to my boss for a little while that this gentleman had worked in a nuclear plant for 10 years. And his job was he would literally stand in front of a square that was taped off in front of a console with a whole bunch of widgets and buttons and lights and different things that you could tweak in a nuclear plant. And his whole job was to sit there and hold a screwdriver by the side of his legs and just wait until OSHA would come by and go, okay, you can turn now panel number 47, screw 3. And he would walk forward out of the box, turn the screw, and back up, and then stand there for another 6 hours. And so when this gentleman joined my team, which was a new software product, everybody on it was very excited. We took a lot of risks. There wasn't a lot of documentation. And he unfortunately hated that project. He was the wrong person for it. And at the time, I kind of made fun of him, not to his face. And I was real immature in my software development career at that point. I would, having done this about 20 years, I was maybe 3 years into my career at that point. But looking back at it, and in the many projects I've worked on, I've really realized that if you're out there and you're frustrated on the project you're on, you may be able to make some simple decisions when you're going into a company to get hired onto a project, or maybe you're at a company with multiple products and you're figuring out which one would I be happiest on that'll help you grow and not get stuck in a situation where you're not the right fit for that project. The second story is on another project, I had a rock star developer, somebody who was really advanced with the code, knew a lot of the latest, greatest stuff, and he was on a team with many other gentlemen who were more conservative. And so he wouldn't write anything down. He hated documentation. He said that typical statement of the code is self-documenting. And while I understand that sentiment, and I think well-written code should explain what its intent is, depending on the team members you're working with, you might really frustrate them if you are someone who likes to move fast and the others on your team aren't that same way. And the third story I'll tell you really quick before launching into the information here is I had a friend who I'd worked with for many years, and he was kind of frustrated with the project he was on. He was at the same company for a long time. And he wanted to get a new job to use a completely different tech stack than he had been using before. He'd been really experienced in one particular set of languages and stack of technologies, and now he wanted to do something new. And there were no opportunities for him at his current company. And so as he went out there and he started kind of interviewing and looking out in the market, he kept always applying to these companies where they already had a product, it already had this newer tech stack that he wanted to use, but he kept failing to actually get very far in the interview process. And he was really frustrated and just kind of felt like, well, how am I supposed to get a job if I want to learn this new technology when everybody I interview with keeps turning me down? And I hope the tips that I give you in this video today help you if you're in that situation, or maybe any of the other 2 stories I told you, that situation as well, so that you don't get into a project where you're really frustrated because it's just not the right match for where that product is in the company's life cycle. So this first diagram I'm showing you here, I've shown it in the playlist that I made on the life cycle of a software product. You can click the card above or the link in the description if you haven't watched that yet at the end of the video. But in that playlist, I talk about how a software product at a company goes through several stages, and there's many different ways that different people like to represent this, but I broke it down in that playlist of videos into 3 stages. And these stages are just important for me to give you a quick overview on, because I'm going to help you understand when you go to join a software project or a software company, depending on your personality and your goals in your career and where that product is on its life cycle, you might love it or be miserable. So the first stage is the early stage of the project, and this is where the product's brand new. The company has not gotten market fit yet. They haven't figured out the exact perfect set of features and pricing and their distribution channel and everything that's needed to make that product profitable just yet. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of friction and a lot of different people trying out different things. And for the right type of person, they might love this. For others, they might hate it. The second stage of a software product's life cycle, and this is with respect to profit, is the growth stage. And during this stage, there's a focus, like I've said in the other videos, on shifting a little bit away from purely feature software development to stabilization. And by that, I just mean getting a little bit more structured with how maybe testing is done and maybe any kind of documentation or code reviews, or if you're doing continuous delivery and you've got a DevOps type of situation, putting automated deployments together and things like that. Now, some teams might do that from the beginning, but my point here being that during this growth stage, the team is usually beginning to mature their software development processes, things that they kind of did off the cuff, and you've heard the term cowboy coder during that early stage, need to become a little bit more consistent just to make sure that as the company's growing and it's making more profit and hopefully acquiring new customers, the code base doesn't become really unstable and put the company at risk. The third stage is the end of life or sunset stage, which I talked about in that video on the death of a software product. And during this stage, the company really is not hopefully going to be making a lot of investments in new software development. It's more really going to be maintenance and some simple, probably changes to the software product to accommodate things that help retain users so that people aren't losing customers as the product isn't really changing a lot. It's just really providing value, but it's not a growing product anymore. So depending on where the product at the company you work for is in its life cycle, what would be best for you? So I want to go through a couple different personality traits and attributes of your career that you might think a little bit about. And hopefully this will help you figure out, am I really on the best software project for what my goals are? Or would it be better for me to maybe look at something else? So the first of these is your tolerance for change. Some software developers, and this doesn't matter if you're a programmer or in operations, or maybe you're in UX, or really any discipline related to software development, thrive on and absolutely love change. They love it when different things are happening all the time. They love it when things that maybe the company assumed were valuable turn out to not be valuable. And so if you have a high tolerance for change, you love change, you thrive on change, the best phase, the best stage rather, in the life cycle of the product that you want to join a company's project on is that early stage. You're going to love it because there's a lot of new things being tried. There's a lot of things that do and don't work out. And so you have to adapt. And for the right type of person, they're going to love that. Now, if your tolerance is low for that, if you actually get frustrated when things change, if you can't stand when you begin working on something and all of a sudden the business wants you to change completely the direction you're working on in the software product, whether it's you've written a bunch of code, now you need to refactor it heavily, you've maybe documented some process, now it needs to completely change. The best stage for that type of personality, if you feel like that at this point in your career, would be that sunset stage when the product's really reached its end of life. It's still making money for the company, but it's not going to be undergoing as much change. And if you find yourself somewhat in the middle, you can deal with change. You don't hate it, but you don't love it either. That growth stage is really going to be the best fit for you. Now, the second aspect of your personality that you need to think a little bit about if you're going to get yourself on the best software project in your career is, what is your desire to learn? If you have a low desire to learn, meaning you like learning, but you just need to get stuff out. You need to produce results. I actually would recommend, and this is going to be contrary to what a lot of other people will tell you out there, but this has just been my experience in working with, again, over 30 different companies in my career already, that the early stage, when a product is first getting off the ground, would be the best fit for you. Now, one thing you might be thinking about, and this is a mistake I think many software companies make, is many software companies that have multiple products, they are always trying to use the latest, greatest tech stack for a brand new product when it's in that early stage. And actually, in my experience, I've found many new products, it's better to use a platform that whoever's going to be developing with it during that early stage is really familiar with. The reason why is code's going to be refactored all the time. The urgency to find market fit is going to be at its highest. And so if you use a bunch of technologies on that project that nobody's familiar with and that are really frustrating and require a ton of learning, it's only going to put more pressure on everyone. So I think you'll find that most companies like to try to use the latest technology stack during that early stage of a product, and that's actually fine. But the important thing is, you as a developer, you need to be competent with it and pretty good at estimating and everything else that's required to at least feel somewhat confident that you can be fairly productive during that stage, because otherwise you're really going to put a lot more pressure on yourself and a lot more pressure on the business. Now, conversely, if you have a high desire to learn, and an example might be my story I told in the beginning of the video. Maybe you've been stuck working on one tech stack for a really long time, and now you want to work on something new. One of the best ways to get your foot in the door, so to speak, with a new tech stack, if you've been somewhat stagnant or you've been working on something you're bored with, is not to try to join a company or start on a project that's in the earlier growth stage, to actually find a product that's very stable and it's in that sunset stage. The reason why is, I explained in the video about how market fit changes software companies during that middle or growth stage, that the goal of that is really to get those processes somewhat documented and consistent. And if you come onto a project and it's in that sunset stage, the nice thing is, hopefully the team that built the product, that went through the early and growth stages of the product, should have documented it fairly well. Most of it should be automated. Hopefully there's a complete suite of automated tests and things like that. And so if you really want to learn a new tech stack and you want to get your foot in the door, joining a company or starting on a project that's in that sunset stage is really going to set you up for the best chance that you can be successful without the pressure of having to learn a whole bunch of new technologies that have very little documentation, and instead really let yourself at your pace absorb that new technology that maybe you never got a chance to work with before because you were stuck on a stack that was older on your last product, and become really competent with it. Of course, if you don't know which one of these categories you fit into, I would just recommend try to join a company where their product is in the growth stage, because then you're going to really get a chance to learn some new things, be able to see things change at a relatively quick pace, and maybe not everything's documented, but without that urgency of the early stage. The third attribute of your personality and where you are in your career that I think you should consider if you're going to decide what software project do I really want to be on, what's right in my career, is what's your preference for structure. There are some people I've worked with. I told the story about the gentleman who was inside a box and he couldn't get out unless OSHA came by and said he could twist a screwdriver. Someone like that who's really having a hard time with working with other people unless there's high structure will be absolutely miserable if they work on a software product that's in the early stage of its life cycle. He'd be much better served at that late end of life or sunset stage. However, if you're someone who doesn't need a lot of structure, you don't need a lot of people to oversee you, you don't need a lot of documentation, the term some people use is a self-starter. You might really enjoy an early stage software product. Now, if you're not sure, again, just try to find a product in that growth stage, and you're probably going to be pretty happy either way. And the last attribute of your career goals and your personality that's really important to consider when you're selecting which software project is right for me is what's your preference for overtime? If you don't mind doing overtime, if you actually are passionate about working late into the night or doing whatever it takes to get things done, join a company or start on a product that is in that early stage. The reason why is there's so much uncertainty and there's so much room for growth and figuring out what the customer wants. It's going to be really difficult for people to plan things. There's going to be a lot of feedback coming in from the customer, and the team has to adapt and respond really quickly. And if you're okay with that overtime and that extra work that you might have to put in, you're going to thrive. You're going to love that environment. Now, conversely, if you can handle absolutely no overtime, and in fact, you want a more sustainable pace, maybe you were burned out on your last project and you need a year or two to recover because you've been working so hard in your career. There's nothing wrong with that if that's where you're at in your career. Nobody's going to hold that against you. Go out and seek a product that is in that end of life or sunset stage. It's going to take a lot of pressure off you, but it's still going to let you learn. And you probably are stressed out maybe if you've been working for a long time on a product that was earlier in its stages, and you maybe know that tech stack and maybe you want to grow now. Again, if you don't really care either way, meaning you're willing to do some crunch time, as people put it, but you would like regular work hours most of the time, your best bet is probably going to be to try to find a company that has a product you can work on that's in that growth or middle stage of its life cycle. So the last thing I want to just highlight very quickly is I talked about this in the video on the life cycle of a software business. Any company that's going to continue to profit but without complexity going through the roof needs to plan that at some point they start investing in a new software product that will hopefully start to profit and grow around the same time as one of their existing products begins to level off. And so if you're at a company and you've been working on, for example, the early stage of a product for a long time and you thrive in change, you love uncertainty, you absolutely are crazy about finding market fit and working with teams that are very unstructured, try to find a company that has a good business model where the way they treat their talent is when you get to that growth stage, you're not stuck working on that software product for its entire life cycle. Because if you're that type of person, you're going to be more valuable to the company if you can start working on the early stage of the new product. And a lot of people get frustrated when they've been on a product for a long time and it starts to slow down, things start to stabilize, and they want that change and they're stuck. And one thing that I would really recommend more software companies do out there is when your product starts to get to that middle growth stage or beyond to the end of life stage, rather than keeping the talent on that obviously thrive in that situation, in that environment full of uncertainty, and forcing them to work a way that they don't like, hire some new people who want less of that uncertainty and let them help the product through that stage. And instead, keep people always working on what they most want to. Now, if you're someone who maybe was working at a company and you worked on a product during that growth or early stage and you went through all that and you really love the product. You love the project, you feel committed to it. You don't care that your work may be getting more structured and that maybe the rate of change is going to slow down and maybe you want a break. It might be okay to stay on that product longer, and you might even be more valuable if you join a new company that has a product that's starting to level off if yours hasn't, so that you can catch a break. So are you on the right software project? If you haven't found it yet, was this video helpful? Leave me some comments below if this helped you, and give me some feedback on maybe some other aspects that have helped you find that perfect software project. If you're new to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. Click the little bell icon next to the subscribe link and you'll be notified each time I post a new video. I'm also on 4 podcast networks if you'd rather listen to this as a podcast: Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes, and you can like me on Facebook. So until next time, thanks.